Today we discuss spiritual warfare, what it is, what it isn't, and how it applies to our lives. Let's talk about that. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Talk About That. I'm your host, Daniel Scott, and joining me today, we have a guest with us, a member of our pastoral team, a member of our ministerial team here, Brother Stephen Caldwell. Welcome.
Good evening. Good evening.
The crowd is excited to have you here.
I'm excited to see the crowd as well. It's good to be greeted in such a way.
If only we could do this on the actual stage, right?
Absolutely. That'd be awesome. Sometimes we need, like that, or an air horn, or something along those lines.
I got
there you go. Just
I got
like
you
that.
back.
Just like that.
Or we could also do they get up to go have a really serious moment.
Yeah.
We could always make it worse.
We
better.
can. Absolutely. Sound effects make everything better.
Yeah, they
everything better.
They do.
There's so many things that you can make better, much more interesting. The most mundane tasks could be made more interesting with sound effects.
I love it.
All of them. Taking out the garbage.
Absolutely.
Could be so much more fun. There you go.
Honey, I just took out the trash. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think I had a yes, dear button one time. That was like every time that my wife would say something and she's like, I want you to do this. And if I didn't want to do it, she had given me this button and I could just eventually just shake my head and just hit the button and it would say, yes, dear. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. It was helpful. It was helpful. Kept me out of a lot of trouble. Truthfully.
Bless it. That's awesome. Well, as you can notice, Pastor Whitley is not with us today. We had actually had intentions. He was on vacation, one of those gone fishing episodes, although he was not fishing.
I'm glad you actually, came back in, saying somebody's not with us is never a good thing. So, I always gotta clarify that point.
He's still with us, just not physically in the room.
Just not here.
Yes, he was away on vacation, and we were going to record this throughout the week as we would normally, but things happened. We all got busy. Life is still good, though.
Absolutely.
So here we are recording on a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
All right. So welcome, Brother Caldwell. Thank you for being with us today, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I hear from a little birdie, you got some jokes for us?
I do. I've been so excited about this. You one-upped me the other day, and I had to come back with one, and I tried my best. So I'm going to give these jokes an attempt here, and this is like the most excited, talked about part of the podcast. It seems like sometimes it's like the jokes. So, which days are the strongest?
Oh, which days?
Saturday and Sunday. The rest are weekdays.
Oh, that's the wrong one. That was the wrong one. I got
crickets on that one.
It's all right.
That's all right. Maybe I'll do better on this one. I'm just warming up. That was just a warm-up joke right there. All right. So what did Daniel tell his real estate agent?
Oh, what?
I prefer a house with no den.
Oh, there we go.
We got one more. We'll see if we can get it on this last one here. What's the difference between a poorly dressed man on a tricycle and a well-dressed man on a bicycle?
What?
A tire.
Now that was good.
That's all I got. I knew you would enjoy that one. That one was right up your lane. That's up Pastor Whitley's lane too. That's really kind of his style of jokes right there.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna have a hard time not telling him that between now and when he actually hears this podcast.
Oh, you should tell him anyways. He does the same thing. He usually tells us the jokes on Sunday and then we hear him on the podcast on Wednesday.
There you go. Well, hey, no good joke is worth, wasting just one time. You have to be able to tell it multiple times until it becomes not funny anymore anyways.
See, I don't know if a joke ever becomes not funny.
I've heard a few.
Until your kid tells it 500 times and you're like, okay, it was good the first couple of dozen times, but you've said it 500 times in the last minute. You're done.
Yeah, they tend to overindulge in jokes. I know my kids do whenever they get an opportunity. If they're not rolling their eyes extremely loud because Dad's telling jokes. So,
yeah. Oh,
I'm like, hey, I'm driving. Deal with it. I get to tell all the dad jokes I want.
So, in our Sunday school curriculum, they usually have these jokes in them, and they're more or less a dad joke. Like, they're great. But one of them today, I had to explain it to Parker. Actually, it was hilarious.
Oh my word! That sounds so. Usually with Parker, I have a captive audience, meaning that I have him captive in a location, and he can't leave. Otherwise, he would. He does not enjoy jokes that much.
There we go. Yeah, it was. Let's see if I can butcher it. It was why do dads love dad jokes? It's like because they're dads or something like that. Like, it was horrible, but I was like, it's like because dads tell dad jokes. That's why they like them. Oh, it's like, yeah, come on, man.
He is not.
So they all kind of missed it, but it was hilarious.
He is very much so like his mama when it comes to jokes like that. They don't get them if they're not like, just right there in their face. And if it's not funny, you won't get much of a laugh out of them.
Oh,
now Paxton, I could just pretty much just say just about anything and I can get a laugh out of him. He is the one that if I'm ever in need of a laugh, or at least somebody to laugh at, something I'm saying, he'll indulge me. So
that's awesome. Love it. So our topic, and we actually taught on this Wednesday night, and you did a fantabulous job.
You set the bar really high. You kind of took all the good points.
No,
That's what I always tell people.
No.
I just came in and just followed up on it. And I don't know that I did as awesome of a job of bringing out the points that I wanted to bring out that I saw you bring out in some of yours. It was really complimenting. I enjoyed the kind of the direction you went, and then I kind of went a little bit of a different direction.
I liked it.
It worked out really, really well.
It sure did. But spiritual warfare, and we'll talk about this and kind of open up to where we went with it and kind of condense this down so everybody can enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So we first started off with understanding spiritual warfare. And I really like the points that you brought up for what is and is not spiritual warfare. So let's go ahead and dive into that first topic. And again, understanding what spiritual warfare is. To start that off, spiritual warfare is just simply, it's the devil attacking us. It's him trying to tempt us with sin. And,
absolutely.
We asked that question, and everyone's like, everybody, what is spiritual warfare? And I was really kind of stunned by how many people did not necessarily raise their hand. So I was kind of blown away with that. And I was like, well, that's a good point because I've always heard the term, what is spiritual warfare? And then I'm like sitting down to think, like, well, what is spiritual warfare?
Absolutely. I mean, and when that's the real question, and I did love the fact that you asked that question of our congregation, and there was not one hand that actually went up, including mine, just honestly, but it not for that purpose, but mainly because I think we have just such a misconception about what spiritual warfare is. We've been told by so many different sources that this is what spiritual warfare is,
right.
and we have no idea what exactly it is, and moreover, what it isn't. Yeah. And I think describing what it isn't to begin with is really the easiest place to start. It's always.
I like how you did that. It was good.
It's always so easy to define what spiritual warfare is not. I think I brought out the point of saying, your bad hair day isn't a spiritual. There are no spiritual forces, doing battle over your bad hair day, or over your inability to remember a password. But it goes even beyond that. It goes into life things in and of itself. Our bishop actually had a tire that was going flat this morning. And it was really interesting because, it was kind of brought up, as they were standing there and they were having to decide, okay, well, what are we doing? This thing's going to go flat basically before church starts. Now, Bishop and Sister Kelly, they get to church really early. They're there like an hour early, and they're thinking, okay, well, the only thing we can do is go into town and get this thing fixed. There's only one place, and it's a good bit away. Are we going to make it, is he going to make it back for church? And I think it was just kind of just said, well, it's always, something just trying to keep you away from church, like on that, and I said, well, we can chalk that one up to spiritual warfare in essence, because, it's keeping you, if it's keeping you away from church, or it's keeping you away from, your duties at church, it could be spiritual warfare. But most of the time, and this was, this is what was said eventually, was most of the time it's just life. That's just life. We all run, we all have a flat tire. We all have, kids that, don't want to get up. That doesn't mean that, the devil has possessed them necessarily, although that could be the case as well. But most of the time,
have you met my kids?
Well, I was thinking in terms of mine too at times, but it's not always the case that it's something that's a spiritual force that's arrayed against you that's keeping you from it. So describing what isn't spiritual warfare is so much easier. And when we begin to think in those terms, it's easy for us to go back and say, all right, so now what is spiritual warfare?
Absolutely.
What is something that keeps us from, the doing the work of the Lord? And I believe, one of the things that I had said in that regard was, that basically spiritual warfare in a very simplistic definition or biblical definition in regards to that would be anything that would keep you from fulfilling God's purposes.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it is something, and now this is once again, and you brought this out, was it's not a physical thing.
Right.
We're not fighting. We're not out there, fighting flesh and blood. We're out there. We're fighting spiritual forces.
Right.
So if it's something that's keeping you from fulfilling God's purposes spiritually, then that is spiritual warfare.
Yes.
Now, those spiritual forces at times use people in regards to that, but more often than not, they're not working through others.
Absolutely.
And so realizing what that is and what it isn't is such a big thing for us to follow. So
that's good. Yeah, and part of my notes was talking about how it's an attack from the devil, from our enemy, because it just purely hates us. The devil is out to keep us from heaven. So trying to deceive us, trying to destroy our walk with God, and trying to destroy our ministries, to destroy our influence, and to deceive us into temptation and temptations and sin. That's really what's one of the greatest ways to say what spiritual warfare is, because, like you said, it's not necessarily always the flat tires, the bad hair days. Our families are fighting, not always, sometimes it's just life. And it really is.
Absolutely.
We chalk too much up to it's the devil did it. The devil made me do it. The devil did this to me. Pastor said this a bunch of times. The devil's not omnipresent. That's absolutely right. He's not over here flattening your tire and then clear across the world doing something else to somebody. That's not how he works, really. But he is out to deceive us and to destroy us.
Well, I mean, through entertainment.
Yes. That's what I was trying to say.
and that does give him way too much credit when we say, well, this is, I hear people say it all the time. You get people that say, well, the devil's just trying to fight me today. He's just trying to keep me from having a good day. And yes, he is. He would love for you not to have a good day.
Right.
But not everything is about spiritual warfare. It's not all, sometimes that's just, that's just the life that gets in the way of it. You're going to deal with bad actors throughout your daily life. We don't want to give him too much credit. I find that people fall into two categories. It seems like you have the people who over spiritualize everything, that everything is a spiritual warfare. Everything is God fighting Satan, every single day. Your check engine light came on and that's spiritual warfare. And it's like, no, that's not always the case. So either everything is spiritual warfare, or you have the other people who nothing is spiritual warfare.
That's a good point.
And that's the scary thing, is when we have people that fall into that second category. It's scary to have people in the first one, because what that means is that we are ignorant of something that is really happening, that really does take place in our lives, that we really do encounter we do encounter spiritual forces. They are real. They're not some made up, ghost story, so to speak.
Absolutely.
But it's scary when we think that there are people out there, and it's not just, people that are in the world. There are Christians out there, people who are sitting on a pew today, sitting there tonight, who are living their lives, and nothing is spiritual warfare to them.
Right. That's dangerous.
Yeah, it's so dangerous to fall into that category, to realize that, you think that nothing is spiritual. Yeah, it's a scary place to be. It's a scary place to not realize. And the devil would be just totally fine with you thinking that.
Yeah.
Because then that gives him free, the ability to actually, roam around and do what he wants to do.
That's good. And a lot of that is, it's almost like a magician, an illusionist. When you look, because that's the whole point of illusionist, magic, whatever. They're trying to get you look over here while they're doing something else over here. And really, you could say the devil's doing that a lot too, because if he can get you look over here, but secretly the whole time he's working over here, doing this right here to fool us, deceive us, what really, when we fall into that deception, is one of the most dangerous parts, because somebody who doesn't know they're being fooled, doesn't know they're being deceived, which, I mean, that's kind of the goal there, but that's really the dangerous point, because then they don't know, hey, I've got to get something in check in my life, because I don't realize that the devil is working on me over here, tempting me with this and saying, here's this temptation, and I'm never going to fall for that, but it's really the small foxes that spoil the vine. So we've got to watch those little areas.
Absolutely.
And when we can't pay attention, so to speak, or, we're too caught up in our movies or television, all the other things that we got going on in life, and saying, I just don't have time to pay attention over here. Sure, I haven't read my Bible today, but, God's going to forgive me. I haven't prayed today, but, God's going to forgive me. I haven't fasted in 12 years, but, God's going to forgive me. When we're not tending to those little areas, it can be especially dangerous for our lives, because
absolutely, we
don't know that we're in danger at that point. It's like somebody walking just down the road, you're in the way of traffic, you could be in for some danger.
That's
but
right.
If you blindly to go to cross an intersection, you could be in a world of hurt there if you're not careful. But that's why we've got to pay attention. We've got to have, a pastor or a preacher or a friend, somebody in our life, even our spouse, to say, keep us in check, that God can work on us and say, hey, I've got to protect myself on this area because something's wrong, something's weak.
You got to have some accountability.
Exactly.
In your life. And that's why you have to submit yourself to a man of God and ultimately to God. And I think, that's one of the things that I'll bring out later on. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we have to do. But when we talk about spiritual warfare, and I know we have to move on to the next part of that topic, but go back to the beginning of when it began.
Right.
Go back to the garden and Satan lying to Eve in the garden, and how that's where it really began.
Right.
Spiritual warfare began in that moment with the lies that Satan had begun to tell, and how Eve was not prepared for that. She was not ready for that. Now, that was ultimately, in my mind, that was Adam's fault, that he did not prepare her.
Fair enough.
And just like it's our responsibility to prepare our families and our children to deal with the lies that they're going to face, the spiritual warfare that they're going to face on a day-to-day basis. And, we're responsible for that.
Right.
Going on past that, you have things like in Exodus 17, and I believe it's verses 8 through 16, where it talks about Amalek and the Amalekites, and how when the children of Israel, when they had came out of Egypt, how they had been coming along, and then all of a sudden they were attacked by the Amalekites. And of course it goes throughout the account of Moses being up on a hilltop with, I believe it was Aaron and her, and they were actually standing up on this hilltop, and every time he would raise his hands, Joshua, he would actually prevail, and then the moment that his hands would fall, Joshua would begin to lose.
Right.
Well, then they had to get up underneath his arms, hold his arms up, and they won a great battle that day. But even at the end of that great battle, it says, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And that's not a physical war. That became a spiritual war that people of God had to face. Understand that, the Amalekites, their name literally meant, ringer, or so what they would do, their preferred tactic of battle was to come in and attack the weak, attack the ones that are at the end, attack the ones that can't defend themselves. So they would attack at the very rear. This was why they deserved so much of God's ire in that moment, was because they didn't attack head on. They didn't come out and attack the people of God face to face. They went in behind and they would attack the young ones, the weak, the ones that had fallen back, and it became that is really indicative of what spiritual forces, how they attack us in general, is through that ringing motion where they are trying to isolate us and just hold us and grip us and keep us from that. So
absolutely,
that's really kind of going back into where spiritual warfare began and how it actually attacks us as Christians. I think that actually leads us into the next topic on that.
So how does spiritual warfare apply to our lives as Christians?
So, as I was saying, with the Exodus, with the story of the Amalekites and how that means the people that ring, if you understand, that these people, their intention was to cut off the weakest of the people, cut off the people that were falling back, and to destroy Israel in that way. And that's really it's a good illustration of what happens to our families, what happens to us when we fall out of the church. When we face those spiritual forces, we don't have the same help that we had. You think Joshua had Moses, but Moses wasn't in it all by himself either.
Right.
Moses was there with two other people standing there having to hold up his arms in what we would consider intercession. I think that the people of God, we fail to realize just how powerful intercession is in our day-to-day life, and how we can help somebody overcome spiritual forces that they're fighting. You may not even realize what you're praying for, but you are interceding on somebody else's behalf, and you are lifting up their cause to the Lord.
100%. That's good right there. Yeah, we've got to understand how spiritual warfare applies to our lives as Christians, and say it goes beyond me, because spiritual warfare affects us all. And at the end of Ephesians 6, 10 through 18, we read through about the armor of God, but verse 18 really comes out and tells us one of our key ways, and this will lead us into our next topic about how do we combat spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
It says praying always. We go through it, and we talked about this a lot at last week's episode on armor of God, making sure we have the armor of God equipped and how we always need the armor of God on. And that's what we use spiritually, because we've got to have all those things in place. But then he gives us another weapon at the end, and that's praying always. So we've got to be praying. We got to be fasting. We got to be in the Spirit. And that's one of our greatest weapons to fight against spiritual warfare. Not just on our behalf, but exactly like you said, where we can intercede on the behalf of our brothers or sisters, or even just people we don't even know.
Absolutely.
We could be called out in the Spirit to go into prayer and say, I don't know who it's for, I don't know what it's for, but I feel like I've got to pray for this need right here. And, it may be somebody clear across the world, but you may be uplifting a missionary in a foreign field and giving them the strength and the protection that they need for their lives, their families, their ministries.
Absolutely. And, and that is the thing, like you said, being in prayer, constantly, how can we defeat these spiritual forces? As we've talked about already, it goes back to identifying what they are. You can't fight what you don't know what it is.
Exactly.
You can't fight something if you can't see it.
That's good.
Maybe see is physically is not the thing, but it's being able to see it in the Spirit. If you can't see it, you can't fight it. Being able to recognize that you're in a battle, that's another thing. I mean, scary thing is, battles are loud.
Yeah.
Battles are if you've ever, tried to, to get your kids to take a bath when they don't want to go to bed, battles are loud.
Yeah.
And they're boisterous, and they're there's something that you can hear, but so are spiritual battles.
Absolutely.
They're just loud on a different level.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a dog whistle. You can't hear it if you're not a dog, you're not in tune with that. Well,
right. That's good.
And I hate to call all of us dogs in essence, but I mean, really and truly, we have to be in tune to the spiritual warfare that's going on around us, like you said, and then we do that through our prayer.
Yes,
staying in constant contact, because even if we don't always see those spiritual forces, then God is always responding to spiritual warfare around us.
Right.
Whether we see it or not, He's responding to it. I don't know how many times that I'm sure I've been in a spiritual battle and I didn't know it in the moment. And come to find out, there was a wonderful saint that was praying for me, or my pastor was praying for me, or one of my brothers was praying for me, or something along those lines. And I had no idea that I was involved in a spiritual battle until all of a sudden that spiritual battle left my side. It was gone. And I felt like this weight that had just kind of just rolled off of my shoulder. And then I realized, oh, I've been in a spiritual battle and I didn't know it this whole time.
Yeah.
That was what was affecting my mood. That was what was affecting my attitude around other people.
Right. That is good.
That was so what good. What was, kind of bringing those horrible actions and thoughts to the top and showing those things. And then, the moment that somebody begins to pray for those things, it's like, oh, I've been in a spiritual battle.
Right.
So God is always moving against spiritual war, against spiritual forces, whether we know about them or not. But isn't it so much better for us to want to know about those things, to stay in constant prayer? Because if you are, then you're going to know that there's something going on.
Yeah.
You're talking about, praying for a missionary that's across the world. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Some of the most powerful moves that I've ever been a part of took place, at 2:00 in the morning, when God wakes you up and says, you need to get up and you need to begin to pray.
Yeah. And
He's not always going to tell you what you're praying for. In fact, most of the time He's not going to tell you what you're praying for. But in those moments, I had woken up and realized that somebody somewhere was in a spiritual battle. I didn't know if it was in my household. I didn't know if it was, like you said, 1,000 miles away, but somebody somewhere was in a spiritual battle, and they needed somebody to lift their arms up so that they could have the battle for that day. Wow. So, we've got to want to be an Aaron or a Hur every once in a while. Everybody wants to be Moses or Joshua in that story, but those two people alone don't win that spiritual battle without the other two guys being in intercession and saying, I'll stand in, I'll fill in the gap, I'll lift up the arms of the man of God. So
that's so good right there, because you are exactly right. It is, it's not about being in the spotlight, the limelight, whatever you want to say. It's about being willing to be part of the kingdom of God and say, I don't care what I do, God, as long as it's for your kingdom. As long as I'm helping somebody for the kingdom, God, that's all I want in my life. We need more people willing to stand up exactly like that, to say, whatever it is, if it's scrubbing the toilets, God, then I'm going to scrub them and sing praises. Absolutely. It's mowing the yard.
Be the best
whatever.
Toilet scrubber, or, whatever that God has called you to be.
Yes.
And it's something that we want to teach our kids, but, that's part of it is making them understand, hey, you're doing something for God. We've got to be the best that we can possibly be for God.
100%.
So
100% agree. And again, it's all about that combating spiritual warfare. We've got to understand, again, go back, read Ephesians 6:10-18, and understand that we are not fighting necessarily the physical things, but it's those spirits, it's those evil powers that are on high. And then we've got to have on the armor of God.
Absolutely.
We've got to use every component of the armor of God all the time, not just every once in a while, but all the time. And we got to use those to help us combat the spirit of warfare that comes into our lives or the lives of our brothers and sisters.
And I love that Wednesday night you brought out a point. You said that, not just have that armor,
Yeah.
but wearing that armor,
Yeah.
putting it on. Don't just carry it around like it's a trophy. I've got my helmet, salvation. It's like, no, you have to put that thing on. You have to have the armor on. Otherwise it's not doing you any good.
Absolutely.
And, another pointed truth about it, and I believe you brought this up, and I'll let you go ahead and bring it up on that because it was so good when you brought it up. You talked about not just having the armor on, but standing.
Yes.
And standing firm once it's all said and done.
Yes.
The only thing I could add to that was the fact that there is no back piece for the armor of God.
100%.
We're not supposed to turn around and run away. We're not supposed to walk away from sin. We're supposed to face it down. And you brought that out so beautifully on Wednesday night, saying, how, once we've put all of this on, we're not done. We still got to stand.
We still got to stand.
Got to stand.
Matter of fact, I started talking to him in Sunday school about it this morning because we were going over that key verse for this month. And I was like, it ends with, we got to stand. And I'm like, yeah, we absolutely have got to stand against the devil, against temptation, against sin, whatever is coming against our lives. I was like, we have to stand. But then I'm like, but then you got to go one more verse again and say, it says, but stand again, that stand therefore.
Exactly.
So we've got to not just stand as in stand our ground, but we've got to keep on standing. We've got to stand and keep standing. That way our families, our friends, because it's not just our lives at stake.
That's right.
We could be harming generations down the road. If I decide,
amen. You need to give yourself do a hand clap on that one. That's good. That's
I don't like
good
to do it for myself.
Well, I can't reach the button, or I'd push it for you.
Love it. But if I selfishly decide I don't want to wear the armor of God anymore, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of warring. I'm ready to lay it down and just give in to the temptations and sin because it's just not worth the battle anymore. Well, my God, I could be harming generations down the road. My kids could quit living for God at that point.
Amen.
Their kids could quit living for God.
Absolutely.
My grandkids, my great-grand, all the way down, we could be harming and destroying generations of people because we made one bad decision and said, you know what? It's just not worth standing up anymore. It's not worth fighting anymore. And, it's only going to affect me. I'm just going to give up now. But no, you've got a spouse, or you may have a spouse. One day you will have a spouse, whichever way. You got kids, grandkids, so forth. But you got coworkers, you got mothers, fathers, cousins. You got friends. You got all kinds of people around you that are watching you too. You're not just standing for yourself. You're standing for them, because if they look at me and say, "Yeah, I know they're a good Christian," and look, they just gave up and said, "It's not worth the fight anymore." Well, why should I even try to fight if they're not going to fight?
Absolutely.
We could be harming so many people.
It's so good that you're bringing that up. When you stop and you think, okay, about like Amalek, the Amalekites.
Yeah.
They weren't just some random people
that
were out in the wilderness when they were walking through. When you look back and you realize that, Amalek himself, his I believe it was his grandfather was Esau.
Yeah. So
they had a connection to Israel and through that, yet they still they were so far away. I oftentimes wonder what it takes to get from an Esau to an Amalek.
Wow.
And I realized that, we're all just one or two, choices away from allowing our family to go down that road. I'm just a couple of choices away from having an Amalek, as a grandson, and then forevermore after that, they're cursed. They're no longer, they'll never live for God through that.
Right.
There's no record of the Amalekites ever turning back to God and serving the Lord. So it's so sad to realize that, and to understand that. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being part of the podcast today, sir. Is there anything else you'd like to add and leave us with?
Only one other thing, and I was going to get to this, but James chapter 4, verse 7, talking about, fighting and doing battle with those spiritual forces. Well, what people like to say in there in 7. They like to say, resist the devil and he will flee from you.
Right.
But they rarely ever back it up and say that whole verse, which
True.
is submit yourselves therefore to God.
Yeah.
Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. It goes on down to say, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord and he shall lift you up. If we ever expect to have dominion over those spiritual forces, it's going to take us submitting ourselves to God, to a man of God, getting a man of God in our lives and saying, this man, I'm going to be submitted to. So
100%.
Amen.
I love it. Okay, start our outro music. Want to thank you for being on the podcast today, sir. I love you. I appreciate you.
Much.
Want to thank all of you for listening today and being part of the Kingdom Speak family. Oh, sorry. I did it again. I was on a roll not doing it. For being a part of the Let's Talk About That family, being part of the Kingdom of God. I always got the being part of the Kingdom of God in my mind. And anyways.
Amen.
Thank y'all. We love you.